Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Bingle, and I'm the Director of Grants in the DeKalb County Nonprofit Partnership at the DeKalb County Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about our Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Action initiative. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. First, we are recording today's session, and that recording will be sent to you later by email. Please note that we have everyone muted, but we encourage you to use the Q&A and chat features that are built into Zoom. And finally, we hope to leave a little room at the end for questions and discussion. We do have a lot to cover, and we're scheduled for an hour, so we should wrap up around 2 o'clock. And if you feel more comfortable sending questions or discussion points to me directly, you should feel free to do that as well. So with that said, I'd like to share with you a little bit of background information before we begin. Since 2015, DCNP has had a training curriculum that helps guide the programs that we offer. We regularly ask for feedback and new training ideas from our members and from our program committee. Our program committee is instrumental, in fact, in outlining what we offer and when we offer it. And the topic of diversity and cultural competence has been included in that training curriculum since the very beginning. This dates back to 2017, and over that time period, we've offered 17 different training opportunities on this topic of diversity and cultural competency. But this I.D.E.A initiative was by far our most comprehensive. It was made possible by an anonymous donor, and of course, we thank them for their generosity. And we also thank the many different collaborators who helped develop the initiative. We attempted to be as inclusive as possible as this program was being designed, and we went through multiple rounds of feedback, and I believe the program benefited greatly from that. And I just want to share with you a list of all the many collaborators who were involved in designing this program. And thank you for their efforts. It really was an inclusive program designing process, and we're just so grateful for the benefit or for the involvement of these collaborators. Throughout the entire project, we've benefited from Delia Coleman's involvement, and she's the consultant who served as a resource for the entire initiative. And I'm going to turn it over to her momentarily. But I'd like to kind of step back and refresh everyone's memory about what this initiative entailed. So we launched it in January with a webinar that was led by Delia, and it was designed for the masses. It focused on terminology, DEI concepts, and offered a primer that was accessible for attendees kind of at all levels of this journey. After that, we opened a competitive application process, and 4 organizations were selected to take part in a more intensive experience. We used a cohort model with the executive director and board chair of each organization participating in that process. Each participant identified a policy or a challenge in their organization, and they identified as that is the project that they wanted to work on. You're going to hear a little bit more about each of those. We met in February for a roundtable discussion to learn about those challenges, to share ideas as a group, and to outline next steps. Then each organization met individually with Delia at various times during the spring and summer. And after that, there was an implementation period. And the idea there was for each organization to put the policy change into action or to address the challenge based on the coaching sessions that they had received. In September, we came back together as a cohort. We talked as a small group about challenges, progress, lessons learned, and that brings us to today with the hopes that you might benefit from hearing about the experiences of the 4 executive directors who participated. Now, to be very clear, this was not a perfect program. It was not a perfect process. It was a pilot project, and it was ambitious. But I have a lot of respect for the 4 executive directors who are joining us today for being a part of that. And they include Mary Ellen Shade of Safe Passage, Michelle Donahoe of the DeKalb County History Center, Brian Reese of the Elwood House Museum, and Fiona Cummings from Girl Scouts of Northern Illinois. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our consultant, our friend, our confidant, I could keep going, our partner, Delia Coleman. Turn it over to you now, Delia. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Ben, and everyone here on the webinar. It has been a real pleasure to work with Ben and all of the executive directors in this cohort on this project. When Ben first approached me to be a part of it, I had shared some thoughts about how to construct the project. And then when he said, and we're also looking for a consultant, I was really prepared. In fact, I almost did hand him like an entire list of people that I knew that he should reach out to. And he said, no, I think we want you. And I thought, are you sure? Because I do have a day job. And he's like, no, I think we want you. So one of the things that I reflected in the middle of this project was the overall context for this work has been the past couple of years. The years of public action, agitation, public statements, greater awareness growing in every community across this country about racial equity, equity in all sorts of different ways in every community, however it shows up. And what I've been impressed with has been the commitment of these executive directors to the work, as well as the challenges that they've had to work through. One of the things that I talked about in that first webinar for the masses that Ben said is an adaptive leadership challenge. It is not a technical challenge. There aren't easy solutions. It is going to take vulnerability, flexibility, a lot of collaboration, a lot of congeniality, as well as shared leadership across every organization that decides to dig into this work, whether it's on the D, diversity, equity, or the inclusion pieces. And so I think with these stories that you'll be hearing from this group, you'll be hearing what that leadership challenge was for these leaders, as well as some of the high-level learnings that they got out of it. But again, before we get started, I just really want to give a round of applause to all of the executive directors here. It's been a pleasure working with all of you, and actually me learning from you and taking those lessons that I learned as your coach back to my own organization, and leading my own board through some of these same conversations. So it has been really wonderful working with you on this. I'm just let's just get right on into it. And Mary Ellen, if we could start with you, the context of the work that you were hoping to accomplish and some of your top learnings.
Sure. Well, hello to everyone who I can't see. And I want to thank Ben and thank Delia so much, both of you, for giving us this opportunity. And Delia, you were a joy to work with. Very, very helpful. So we were facing a lot of racial equity turmoil at Safe Passage when we applied to get involved with this project. And we had been doing a lot of work to try to better understand what our issues were, and also put some things in place to give staff of color more, equity is not the word, but just more opportunity, I guess, to do some of the things that were important to them, such as participating in some of the protests that were happening in DeKalb, and giving them our phone numbers in case they got arrested, and letting them have an extra day of PTO because of, you know, all the stress. And we also met as groups, and we had a lot of hostility in the beginning, and that was really, really difficult. And one of the things that we were accused of is that we understood equality, but we did not understand equity. And we did not have equity in our organization. So it's been a complete learning process from the beginning. And we were, like I said, doing a lot of things before even this opportunity came about. And when we applied to get involved, we had said that we wanted to work on our staff evaluation process. We wanted to make sure that you know, there was not implicit bias that was taking place in those evaluations, and how could we develop it better and make it more useful, more culturally competent, and just all of those things. So that is what our initial request was to work on. And we talked with Delia, and one of the things she really talked about was that maybe we were putting the cart before the horse, and that one of the things we needed to do was to work with staff and identify our agency values, and what are those values, how do we operationalize them, and how do we use them to develop our policies and our procedures and our culture to make it more equitable and diverse. And I would say that we have been, since I've been there, a pretty diverse organization. We serve a very diverse population. So we are constantly seeking staff of color, staff who can speak Spanish, and staff of color who, because we do have the belief and the value that it is helpful to people to be able to talk to people like them. And so I would say we started out with a very diverse staff, and again, because of our diverse population that we serve. So we have embarked on a lot of things. We did a whole day with a facilitator to identify values of the organization, of which two of them were equity and inclusion, and that how, you know, we're continuing to work on those to figure out how to operationalize them. How do they work in our organization? We've had some, I would say, setbacks, but we've also, so we did a climate survey of the organization, and it was anonymous, but we were able, because somebody outside did it, but we were then able to learn that none of the staff of color really answered the survey. And so that was disconcerting, really. And so, you know, again, we talk about it. We had developed a change team. We had been working, I don't know if we had the consultant before we worked with Delia, but I think maybe we've been working with a consultant. We had done a lot of training on implicit bias, on microaggressions, and had been able to develop some policies around some of those things. But then going back, the value work is really basic. And so it has started really to inform some of the things that we're doing around policy and some of the things that we're doing around culture. So we continue to have what we call a color coalition, and all staff of color at Safe Passage are invited to participate in that. It's a support group, but we also try to, you know, we want their input about things, if there's something we need to be doing differently. We're also doing, the change team is bicultural, but again, it ebbs and flows with people. I don't know if any of you have had problems with staff leaving, and that it changes. So those lessons that I learned is, one, that you have to really be humble in doing this work. I am constantly challenged myself, thinking, I don't see us as an inequitable or an unequitable organization, but like, what am I missing? What am I missing in my perspective of white privilege? And so being humble, really being proactive in asking people to get involved and asking people to share their opinions, even if they might be hard to hear. And we've started doing, the Color Coalition asked that we put out signs. Our agency is located in it's a neighborhood, really, it's a block, and we have houses, so we're in houses, although we are trying to raise money to build a new building. But so we did in-house, actually created signs and had yard signs printed, and all are welcome here, and Black Lives Matter, and no Asian hate, and they say a large variety of things, and they're a lot, so they're now throughout the outside of our organization. And the thing that we've embarked on the most recently is we are working on creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement for the organization. And again, all of it is a learning process. I'm supposed to talk about a couple things that I learned. It's like I learn new things every day. I don't think I really understood what adaptive leadership was, and learning about that. Maybe I'm doing it and I don't even know it.
Mary Ellen, one of the things that I really enjoyed in working with you and coaching with you, and as well as your board member and staff member, this is adaptive leadership. It's iterative. There is never going to be a point, and I think everyone should realize this, there was never going to be a point at which, when you're going through something like this, where you figure out the one thing to do that will solve everything. That is never, ever going to happen. And as leaders, you shouldn't anticipate that, because you will be completely disappointed forever. That is never, ever going to happen. So there is going to be the fact that a cohort of your team didn't respond to the survey. That provides another opportunity to go back and find another way in. And it's repetition, it is persistence, it is commitment to demonstrate and create a pathway of trust so that equity can flourish as a two-way street, and as something not as a gift that is given to staff, but something that staff and leadership work with together to create an organization. Yes. That is going to take time and persistence and commitment. And so building those commitments through a shared set of values and building that trust incrementally over time, you're doing it. You were going to feel like crap and you were going to feel like a terrible leader, but you are also going to be able to see people on your team who are leaning into it and stepping into it. And that is what you rely on. So thank you so much for that, and for demonstrating that this is hard and it does take time, but in the end, it really is worth it. And I'm sure that your team is really glad that you're all going on this journey together. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You really helped us a lot, and me a lot.
Just helping to have a conversation so you can see what is in front of you. So I was happy to do that.
Thank you.
I want to move to Michelle and Brian. The two of you had a project that
Delia,
was.
can I
Oh,
interject?
sure.
We're gonna move to Fiona next.
Oh,
if you don't
Fiona.
mind. Yep.
Got it. I can do that. I pivoted. Fiona.
Sorry, and I feel absolutely terrible, but I just had a text saying my new washing machine is arriving earlier than I expected, and I've been waiting more than a month for it because there are no installers, right? It's really hard. You can buy them, but there's no one to install them. I have to have a new washing machine, so I'm really sorry, but I'll just, I'll speak, I'll dip out, and then I'll come back. So really sorry, Michelle and Brian and everybody else. It's just horrible timing, but I'm sure you understand, right? So the Girl Scouts, we picked a project to examine cultural appropriation. We also, like Mary Ellen, had been working pretty diligently on what we call I.D.E.A, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity and Access. And really, as Delia said, grounded kind of in the events of the summer of 2020. Like many of us, I think we believe that we were an inclusive organization and we did do things right. And then suddenly we realized that not being, thinking you're doing things right is not the same as being directly anti-racist or anti anything that oppresses people. So we stepped into the space kind of in the summer of 2020, and we began with education for our own staff. We used a program for University of Pennsylvania. It's called Reese, and it's a free program, and nonprofits like free programs. And then very seriously, we started at the beginning of this year with the United Way of Illinois Equity Program, which is a fantastic program. I highly recommend it if you haven't done it. It's a free program. It's 21 weeks long. It's still available to watch. And every week they provide you with interesting materials to explore your own biases, your organization's biases, to understand individual systemic and institutional racism. And then they branched out towards the end to look at other oppressed minorities and peoples in our society as well. So we picked, in the context of that, we wanted to pick something that was very relatable for our staff and our wider stakeholders, including girls and volunteers. And we decided that we would like to look at something that's concerned us for a while, which is potentially cultural appropriation of Native American artifacts, names and activities. You'll all be familiar with, I'm sure, with youth camp. Many of the activities that we do, we've probably culturally appropriated from the Native Americans, like making dream catchers, like singing certain songs. And we certainly have used names both in camp locations, campsites, and also in the way that we designate certain volunteer units. So we also applied and got accepted, and Delia was a great coach for us, and thank you for that. We also put this within a context of our strategic planning for this year. We did something called Appreciative Inquiry, which happened all through the summer, where we involved a lot of stakeholders. And one of the things we learned from Appreciative Inquiry, as well as this particular cultural appropriation examination, was that you need to include all the stakeholders to start with. So just like Mary Ellen was saying, their minority community was very engaged in their project. We made sure that from day one almost, we invited a Native American representative to be a part of the larger meetings that we were having via Zoom, which included some staff and some board members and some of our volunteers, and even later some of our older girls. And we met several times together to debate what were the issues. And then this culminated in a visit to Trickster. The Trickster Cultural Center is in Schaumburg, and this big group, more than 20 of us, visited at the end of September and learned a lot about Native American culture from looking at the exhibitions. And we had a great tour from a couple of Native American representatives from the different tribes. And we also learned that we tend to think of Native American culture as monolithic, but just like Europe, there are many, many different tribes and perspectives and even positions on things. So there isn't one Native American position on anything either. They're very deferential to other tribes and what they think. So that was one of our learnings. Out of all of this meeting, we then agreed that we would break into small groups. And we have 6 working groups now, which are administered by a staff member. So, they have the Zoom licenses and the calendars and things like that. But we have a Native American advisor in each group, And then the working members, we have 3 or 4 working members, are older girls or staff members, board members and volunteers. And the groups that we're currently looking at are land acknowledgement. So we have a number of camps and a number of resource centres. How do we acknowledge that in an appropriate way? Where do we do it? And when do we do it? Naming appropriations. So after some discussion with the Native Americans, it appears that the only thing that might be of concern, the way we do it now, is the way we call some of our volunteer units by tribal names. We have a bigger one around recruitment and making Native Americans feel welcome in our organization, because recruiting is one thing, but if they don't feel welcome, they're not going to stay with us. And of interest in that was that we learned that leadership in Native American cultures is not the same as the way we practice leadership in Western type leadership organizations. There is quite a bit of academic literature around this, and indeed Native Americans have a form of leadership that's pretty similar to the Maori form, which is called wayfinding, which is a much more collaborative style of leadership than we would typically expect in the West. And in Girl Scouts, we have what's called the Girl Scout Leadership Program. That's what girls are learning all the way through. And we recognize that selling ourselves on your girl will become a leader, and that means Western type leader, may not even be the best approach for us to take. So we have to have a radical rethink about what does leadership mean for not only the Native American community, but the wider community in Girl Scouts as well. 2 more that we had were community communication and education. All of this is only as good as the way we speak about it to people and with people. And then the final subgroup, which sort of rose out of nothing, which was interesting, was missing and murdered Indigenous women allied with human trafficking awareness and prevention. We already have a human trafficking awareness and prevention program in Girl Scouts, and this allies well with the MMIW. And there was a lot of interest in reaching across the boundaries that we currently have to work together to see if we could do anything. They could help us or we could help them. So we have these 6 working groups right now. They're all off doing their thing. The plan is to come back in February to a bigger plenary, a Zoom, and report back. And then excitingly in March, we're going to participate at Trixter in what's called a talking circle, which is a way that leadership is practiced and decisions are made in tribal culture. So we're going to participate in that and then figure out how does that help us perhaps solve some of the issues we're finding, or more importantly, how could that perhaps become a practice that we do more and more in our own work and processes. So we're excited about that. If you haven't been to Trixter Cultural Centre in Schaumburg, it's highly worth a visit. We didn't even know it was there, but we had a wonderful time and learned a lot. Some of our other learnings through this process, I think I've talked about the fact that it's really great to have all the stakeholders involved from the beginning. I think it's kind of presumptuous to assume that white people are going to be able to solve these issues without having all the stakeholders at the table from the very beginning. And we've broadened our depth with the Native American community in a way that's been tremendously enriching for us all, very enlightening. They've been so patient with us and so kind, and it's just been a wonderful experience. We've learned also that how you communicate is really, really important. Communication and education is probably the hardest piece of all of this. And we have, 15,000 volunteers and girls in our organization. Many of them are very interested in this sort of topic, but there are some who see anything that's about creating equality and access and talking about oppression as removing their own advantages. So we have to be very careful in how we do it. And what we are sort of figuring out is that talking about DEI already raises some people's hackles, but if you talk about belonging, and in the end, DEI is all about making people feel they belong in your organization. Talking about a belonging organization is a much less in-your-face topic, I think, because everybody understands what it feels like to want to belong. So we're starting to do a lot of work in our organization now on belonging, studying some of the academic work on belonging, but also using some of the communication strategies and tools around that. So that's been another important learning for us, because we'll all know as we step into this space, you know, we're running at the front, we've completed the marathon, and many people are still at the back wondering why we're doing it in the first place. So that's been an important learning for us as well. And I have some great books on belonging that I could share in the chat afterwards. A couple of great books that we're studying ourselves, which has been fantastic. The other thing I would just learn is thank you DCNP. This has been a fantastic methodology. I would really, really recommend, and in fact, I have been recommending it to the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Expertise, to various United Ways, that this is a 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. It's not 1 + 1 + 1 = 4, because all of us have been learning from each other. It was a really wise use of grant money and grant resources, because we're all making massive step changes. What we've learned and the way that we've done this process, we're going to be able to translate now and start looking at, we're looking at Black families. How can we help Black families belong in our organization? This isn't something you do and check the box. We know it's going to go on for years and years and years, but having participated in this and had these learnings we've had is making it a step change for Girl Scouts.
Fiona, that's really, really great to hear. I think when we had our check-in earlier this year, one of the things that I was so excited to hear about was how you all fully embraced that engagement piece, involving all of the stakeholders, knowing that it makes the process more complex, takes more time, requires more resources, requires more communication, and also vulnerability on the part of your organizational leaders. But the return is so incredibly rich, that community exchange, that community building and networking, that's just so incredibly important. And if you could, before your washer arrives, if you can provide the link to the RACE program in the chat, or at least forward it on to Ben and Mark so they can share it with the rest of the group, that would be fantastic. But thank you.
The RACE program, RACE, it's an acronym, and you have to put some of the pieces in place, but it's a framework to do things. And I would highly recommend the United Way Equity Challenge. If people haven't done it as well, I can provide that link, but our staff really love it. Some on their own have adopted it into their email signature so that other people can see it. That was very, very interesting for us. And we required our staff to take it, and we also required them to have conversations around what they were learning, because it's very interesting material and it's specific about Illinois. So.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to turn now to Michelle and Brian, and I talk about them as a unit because their projects are complementary. And this was a unique opportunity for the two of these organizations to address a need from two ends. And so Michelle and Brian, I will hand it over to you so you all can talk about your projects.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And like everyone else, we're just so appreciative of your input and the opportunity from DCNP to participate. I think these conversations definitely led us down a different trajectory and set us up for success. And that's one of the things I want to touch upon is success and failure. But I think kind of, we were able to have a smoother path because of this experience. We started out with just looking at having a touchstone statement for our organization to get into this Arts in Action project that we'll go into detail about. That was already ongoing, but it's like, if we want to get board buy-in and support of this work, we needed to have this part of our, our mission kind of included it, but with our vision statement and then our organizational goals. And as I was preparing for today, I just wrote down some words, and it was just interesting to listen to your introduction, Dahlia, that I had down that we needed to be flexible, we needed to be ready for surprises, and we needed to collaborate. So kind of always echoing what you started us off with today, because it took a while for us to get there. I mean, we had put out something and then, okay, well, what about this? What about that? And let it sit and then revisit it. And then it was just on Tuesday that our board actually passed what this vision statement will be. And I was pleasantly surprised that I gave them a couple different options. One was to incorporate it into our existing statement. And then we also have a separate statement that as a call out to our commitment to working with different history groups, that collaboration is really important. And I said, well, we could incorporate it into our main statement, or we can have another additional statement like we do with the history partners. And they said we need to do both. So it was just really clear that they wanted to make that commitment. So now our board, in addition to everything else, has added that with our vision statement, that we want to engage people with all backgrounds to ensure they see themselves in our local history. And then the separate statement is that we are committed to connecting with people throughout DeKalb County to encourage thoughtful discussions that encourage different perspectives, to document these stories, and to foster a feeling of belonging within our county. So again, that belonging. And then we did set a specific additional goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to prioritize the experiences of people whose history is not represented in the collection, programming, or educational resources, and also to provide specific learning opportunities with people of color to assist in telling their stories. So here we are now holding ourselves accountable. That being said, during our conversation, you also mentioned you need to be thoughtful in these statements, but don't put all the time and energy into the sentence. You need to put the time and energy into the work. So that's really where the Arts in Action project is our example of, now we have this touchstone, but what does it look like in reality? So in a quick summary, Arts in Action is a project that Brian and I have been discussing since July of 2020, after George Floyd's murder. What can we do? How do we do it? And we knew we had some stories to tell. We didn't know what they would look like. And ultimately, we were able to be part of a larger project. And I'm going to go over the big picture stuff, and Brian's going to go into some of the details. But we were basically including Black and Latino history in DeKalb County and presenting it as an online exhibit with artwork. And it worked really well in many ways. We've been able to expand and grow it from that initial starting point in March of this year. The surprises, though, that were key, and it's just, how do we just, you can't really prepare for surprises except for to expect them. And, some of the questions that we've gotten is just like, well, you're not celebrating our community. Why do you want to bring up these issues? And, Brian and I are very committed to not committing harm, but this is also what we do. We tell our community's history, and whether we're not doing our jobs if we're just picking up the things that we want to celebrate. And to get a better understanding and to move forward and to make our community stronger, we need to tell all of the stories. And we've been doing this in different ways, but now to really make this a priority and to move forward is really important. I think another, some words of wisdom that we gained through this process is, as we went through and presented this at, at a board meeting, make sure that, see if they had any questions before the online exhibit went live. It was recommended that we get some community messengers and some trusted people in the community, that if there is any negative feedback, that it's not just us or people on our committee, that we have people in the community that we've had these conversations with, and that they are willing to step up and support our work as well. And that just helped us, that we're not in this alone. And the other part too, with the surprises in this, we just did a presentation yesterday and it went very well. We weren't really sure what some of the questions were going to be, but someone in the group had commented, just thanking us for our work and that we were really brave to do it. And, at that moment, I was like, well, thank you. And then I'm like, no, we shouldn't have to be brave to do this. This is what we all should be doing. And so there are a lot of emotions that you're going to feel through this process too. You're going to get really frustrated that things are going slow, or you're not getting the reactions or the responses you think that people should get. But again, we have to have patience and accept where we're at and where other people are at, but hopefully we can move forward together. And the last piece, I think, is just the most important, not only with just Brian and I collaborating on this project, but the opportunity to work with Fiona and Mary Ellen and learn from each other. is, especially in today's climate, if you have someone that you can do this work with, you're going to be more successful. It's again, together we're stronger. And one of the opportunities we've had is to expand this project to include both Hinckley, Genoa, Sandwich, and Kirkland, and these stories. And I wasn't comfortable going on this journey myself. I know they certainly wouldn't be. And now that we are all working together, again, we've got that support network to be able to have these discussions and kind of figure out, how do we tell these stories? And it's just so much easier when we know we're not doing this on our own, trying to figure this out without any help. So find those right people that will support you in this work, and you'll set yourself up for success. Which brings me to failure, which is also discussions that Brian and I had early on. And it's like, we have to be ready for failure. And I'm like, what? I don't ever want to be ready, for failure. We're going to work hard and we're going to be successful. And that's not always how this works. But what is failure? Is failure that we have protesters and that we have no more donors for our organization? Or is it that nobody cares? At least, what is failure? And I think the worst part would be that nobody cares. Give me the opportunity to have a discussion. I may not change your mind, but at least we can have a discussion and, hopefully move forward. And so anyway, I just wanted to, give people that word of encouragement that it's definitely not an easy thing to do all the time, but it is rewarding and definitely worth all the time and energy. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian, who will kind of go into a little bit more of a deeper dive of what the Arts in Action project was.
Thanks, Michelle. And I'll also add to your comment about collaborations and failure. One of the comments that I had to Michelle early on was like, well, if we fail, we both go down together. So it's not just one of us going down. So you spread around the joy a little bit. But yes, we were setting ourselves up for a whole number of different things of, what's going to happen once this project launches. And I.D.E.A did have that great comment to us of find these community ambassadors who will support your project and your institutions. And just an idea of collaboration, how Michelle and I work is, it's like, yeah, I'm thinking about this idea. This is a great idea. I'm thinking about this. Who should I contact? And as I'm like making a list and pondering this throughout the day, Michelle calls me and says, okay, I've talked to 8 different people and they're all on board. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm getting there, but it's just great. It's just great to have a trusted collaborator in the project. So let me just start off, Brian Reese from the Elwood House Museum. One of the kind of key challenges that got me involved in this project was really the murder of George Floyd and what was going on in our country. And Michelle and I got together really early on in June of 2020 and said, what can we do? And what we did is came up with a title for a project, Arts in Action. That's what we had. We had a title. If you know museum work, or probably most any other type of work, you don't start with a title, you start with the project and the title comes last. But what we wanted was action. And we knew that a way for us to tell stories is through history, but also on leaning on contemporary artists to kind of bring history to life for us at this given moment. So Arts in Action was our title. Some of the histories that we were uncovering early on, we're talking the 1920s in DeKalb County, KKK rallies in Sycamore and various other places. And just to remind everyone, the KKK wasn't just after African Americans or Blacks at that time. We're talking immigrants, a variety of different nationalities, Catholics even. It was a whole group of hatred going on. And yes, it was happening right here. Along with that, we're talking about restricted covenants in which people of different races were not allowed to own property. And I had an inkling at this point in time that there was something historically involving the Elwoods, and that was that they had put a racial covenant in place. in a property just behind what today is the Elwood House Mansion, between the Elwood House and NIU, Northern Illinois University. And I hadn't seen the covenant, I hadn't seen the description of it, but located it during the part of this process. And it was like, whoa, okay. So now I really am involved in this. Because before it was just like, this is a side project. This is something that, you know, we're really feeling and kind of hurting right now. But all of a sudden, no, now it's more mission-based, and that the Elwoods were part of this process, you know, part of this process of a racial covenant, saying, you know, people of only the white race can own a home in this neighborhood. Throughout the process of this project, we found racial covenants throughout, you know, all the areas, Sycamore, DeKalb. As we keep looking, we'll find more. It seems like in the 1920s in this area, it was especially prevalent. It was used throughout, you know, the North in this time period to keep people out, essentially. But by tying these things together, these bad things that happen in history, Michelle and I were able to kind of weave some stories, and we ended up using themes to tell those stories. And, you know, we're themes of fear, exclusion, community, and hope. And one of our goals was, yeah, we want to tell these bad stories, but in the end, we want to have some hope, and we want to share some positive things that are going on. And through that, we contacted artists of color and said, will you help us on this project? We got a $5,000 grant through something called Healing Illinois, and we worked with NIU and Family Service Agency on this project. The $5,000 awarded to our project, we gave away to the artists as stipends. So we had 10 artists with $500 stipends to kind of help share our story. And we shared our themes with them and said, you know, help us tell this story. And they were in, you know, they were so pleased to be part of it. And we were thankful to have them, because we couldn't have done it without the artists kind of making the project come alive for us. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. It's just kind of an overview of Arts in Action. We can put a link to the presentation in the chat box, maybe, Michelle, and then others can view it. And we're working on it. It's still in process. I will say, though, we had to develop it in the 3-month time because of the grant, and it was very, very fast. And one of my takeaways from that is we were working, you know, in the evenings, on our weekends, trying to get this project together. Don't do that with DEI work. Don't do it. Because in the end, you know, you're starting to hate the project because it's taking all of your time and all of your energy. And it's not just while you're working on it, it's sitting in the back of your mind all the time. So I would say, you know, carve out a time of your normal workday and just make it part of that normal workday. It's really probably the biggest takeaway from me throughout this project. Yeah, you just don't want to resent it while you're doing it, you know. And then the other takeaway is be content with small steps along the way. We had a lot of conversations with people, with our own boards, with other boards, with Rotary members, with, you know, members of churches. Those are great to have, and they're important to have in this, because you're sharing stories and you're gathering information. And Michelle and I have given this presentation of a virtual presentation of Arts in Action, maybe a half dozen or a dozen times. And each time we learn something through conversation at the end, through feedback and evaluation. And that's really important. And that's something we've learned through this process of working with I.D.E.A and DCNP, is that, you know, take the steps, because each step, at least it seems like you're going forward. Every once in a while, it's maybe a little bit of a step back or maybe a step to the side, but keep that momentum going, because you are learning yourself along the way. The other component of what we were working on was a racial diversity internship for the museum. We have been working historically with students of color with the university over the last decade that I've been here, probably longer. But we wanted to formalize it at this point. We decided that just giving a stipend wasn't enough anymore, and that we wanted to do a paid internship. So we're starting out small, unfortunately, but what we're doing is a 1 semester paid position to a student of color, primarily in history, art history, museum studies, kind of our normal place where we would have students coming to us. And it's just to diversify the museum field. Museums have historically been very bad about reaching out and attracting different races, nationalities. It's primarily a white a kind of vehicle to enter the museum field. So we're just going to try and do our part for that. And we decided, yes, we could, kind of raise the money and gather it ourselves, but instead we decided to open a fund through the community foundation to make it very visible and to also make it forever. This is not just a whim. This is what we're doing. We've raised about $10,000 to $12,000 so far. I'd like to see it hit about $40,000, so it'll at least pay out that 1 semester annually, at around 4% or so. And just the idea that I could leave this organization tomorrow, but our board will still every year be deciding, hey, here's the payout, and this is going toward our racial diversity internship. So I really like that. I really like that. And the board, of course, is very pleased with the direction, putting money into that fund themselves. We did, for all of us local, participate and give DeKalb County, and we put the diversity internship as part of that. So we raised about $3,000 that day alone toward that program. Again, though, some of my last takeaways: if you can partner, definitely do it. If you can hire Delia, definitely do that. Although she does have a day job, everyone. The ambassador idea, I think, was really great. And just take your time with this process. It's important. It's important work. But thank you all.
Working with Brian, you and Michelle, and seeing your project develop over time, I remember reading your applications, and you all were there was like this very discrete thing that you wanted to do. We want to have a statement. We want to have this internship. And then through our coaching conversations, and learning more about what was happening in your community, I was like, yeah, that's not the thing. That's not the thing. There's this other thing that you're actually working on that is the thing. And I think that's part of adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership recognizes that what you think is the problem that you're trying to solve, there is something beneath that. And that is where your real work starts. And the way that you all, Michelle, Brian, and your board leaders have really embraced that and actually embraced the fear of failure. Every nonprofit executive director is like, I'm an overachiever. I get things done. I am results oriented. I am going to meet all of the deliverables of this grant requirement. And that is what I do because I am an executive director. We all know that. Adaptive leadership throws that all in the trash. That is all in the trash because there are no deliverables other than to work with your community for a common shared vision. And there are no deliverables for that. And so you all working together through the fear, what is the greatest fear that we have? Well, that we'll lose donors. And here you have a support now for a paid internship that will help diversify the field. That is so incredible and just so far beyond how you first started out. And I'm just so thrilled that there's this kind of progress and this kind of commitment from your community. And also, I will also say, I learned a lot about DeKalb through your projects. I was like, I didn't even know that there were people of color in DeKalb, but now I know. And so this has been really great. So good job, everyone. Ben, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions that have come in directly to me, and one of those is about adaptive leadership. And I love the way you've been framing this, Delia, because what it does is it reinforces that this initiative was adaptive. I mean, the proposals that came in that were originally submitted in almost each one of these cases, you said, and then we shifted that a little bit and it changed and it evolved and it's been adaptive. And so this person says, I appreciate what you said about the ambiguity in leadership on this issue. Can you expand on adaptive leadership and the role of shared leadership in this work?
Yeah, so just very briefly, and I will, for folks who have read books on adaptive leadership, y'all are probably going to give me a side eye and go, well, that's not exactly. So I'll just sum it up in my Delia way. There are different kinds of challenges that leaders face. Some are technical challenges. How am I going to implement a Salesforce migration? That takes very specific, discrete skill sets and competencies in order to do. And at the end, you have a Salesforce migration that has been rolled out and your entire organization is now doing Salesforce and using it. That is an example of technical challenge. There are other challenges, however, that are the product of people's values being challenged, being confronted with. And I will use Michelle and Brian's projects as an example. The technical challenge is, how are we going to do this project, this Arts in Action project? But the adaptive leadership challenge is, how will our community react to the fact that how they understand our community is not how other people in the community also experience this community? That they are going to be confronted with a story about their community and the clan that is going to bring up a bunch of stuff that gets to the core of who they are as people, as nice middle-class people living in the middle of Illinois. That is adaptive leadership. How do you deal with that? How do you grapple with that? So adaptive leadership challenges require leaders to draw on skills that don't lead themselves easily to technical competencies. You are leaning on, as Fiona said, a lot of communication and communicating across different communities. So you're not just communicating with your board chair, you also have to communicate with the people who have been left out of your community, however you define that community. Like Mary Ellen said, you were going to have to communicate with people who were looking at you as the enemy, who are looking at you as, you have harmed me and now I don't want to trust you. Adaptive leadership in a diversity, equity, and inclusion context means that you have to put aside your ego in order to be extra vulnerable, in order to create the conditions for change. That is what adaptive leadership brings. And I think that so often we in the nonprofit space, when we think about DEI, we think about it as technical challenges. How do I get my staff to just be happy with Juneteenth? That's not the problem. The problem is members of your staff don't see themselves as being valued, recognized, and as a part of the broader community. And Juneteenth is a proxy for that. So how do you get behind that proxy to get to the heart of the matter? So this entire process, I think, has been a really fantastic case study about how all of these different stakeholders, executive directors, board leadership, which was something we didn't really talk about here, but which I think was a direct contributor for the success of this project, because you all were taking steps and making moves, and your board leadership was with you. Every step of the way, every coaching session, I was talking to you and your board leader. And that kind of commitment is so incredibly important for your teams to see that this isn't just like, let's just have a statement of commitment and step away, because that is accountability, that is responsibility, and that's buy-in from the top. If there isn't buy-in from the top, the people on the bottom are going to call shenanigans on all of it. And so I just think that getting the book, and I'll send the book and the resource to Ben so he can share it with everyone in the webinar. But adaptive leadership, I think, is, for me, the pathway through DEI work.
Thank you, Delia. And I want to thank all the panelists as well. And we appreciate your board chairs being involved in this. You know, a minute ago, Delia used the word vulnerability, and even participating in today's panel shows that you're willing to be vulnerable. You're willing to share your experiences. And that goes such a long way. So this has been a high point for me in my role at DCNP. And I just appreciate the involvement of all of you and of Delia, and also the collaborators who helped design this program. So thank you. And as we close today, I just want to remind everyone who's joining us that we are in the middle of our 2022 membership drive. We encourage you to visit dcnp.org to renew or to learn about the programs and benefits that we offer. We're actively planning our program schedule for 2022, and we have a lot coming up. So we hope to see you in the new year. Thank you for attending, and my sincere gratitude goes to our panelists and to Delia for sharing their time and their experiences with all of us today. Thank you so much. Take care. Happy holidays.